Excellent. All right. Well, welcome everyone. My name's Dylan High with the Washington State Historical Society, the Heritage Outreach Team. We're very excited to be continuing on this workshop series all around America 250 and how you can participate. I'm very excited to introduce my colleague today, Alethea Whitman, who is our Ideas Officer, Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, Access, and Sovereignty. And Alethea is going to be talking a little bit more about um, when we're looking at these projects in America 250, how we can really engage with our community and really get to understand who our community is. And so we're very excited for Alethea to bring this presentation today. She's got a lot of awesome ideas planned out for this, pun not intended. So I'm going to turn things over to her. Thank you, Alethea.
Hi, everybody. It's good to see you today. I was wondering if before we dove in, all of you would mind just putting in the chat really briefly your name, where you're joining us from today, and that way we'll be able to get a sense for who's in the room. We'll have some breakout conversations later, so more discussion, but it'd be great to get a sense for some of those hey, how you doing and who I am. And as Dylan said, I am the Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, Accessibility, and Sovereignty Officer here at Washington State Historical Society. And we, in my role, I work on the Diversity and Local History Grant, which some of you might be familiar with or maybe have been a grantee before. And in that role, I just want to do a real quick plug for the Diversity and Local History Grant and say that the grant is open and accepting applications. So if you haven't already, please take a look at our website and go check out that grant opportunity. And so now that we've kind of got some of these introductions going in the chat, thank you so much. Let's dive into our topic today, which is knowing your community. Of course, this is a really important thing you might be doing or hoping to do through your 250th projects and events or planning, but this is kind of an all the time sort of a pursuit in our history and heritage organization. So I'm sure you've been thinking about this for a long time and putting your energy towards understanding your community, and hopefully this presentation, this time to connect is one more way to maybe bring some new ideas up or get brainstorming. So let's see if we can move forward. Okay, so as we start talking about knowing our communities, I love to hone in on the word community itself because we use this word a ton. If we're a nonprofit, organization, if we're a history and heritage organization, and often when we say community, like big community, what we're often referring to is a lot of interconnected, smaller sub-communities that make up a big community. And we just kind of sometimes need community as a word or groups and identities as a word to sort of speak broadly about, for example, a place. That's often how we use community the most, I would say, in terms of how I understand it. In our heritage organizations, this neighborhood community or this county community or this town community, and we kind of use the place as the stand-in grouping. But sometimes we're talking about like an issue as sort of the basis for how we describe community. We always have, we're thinking about our professional communities, like our history and heritage sector communities. And of course, I would all count you as part of that community with me today, our field communities. And then of course we have identity communities. We talk about like the big community of, for example, like LGBTQ plus community. And of course, like that's a great example because, we've got so many different peoples represented within that larger group. So when you kind of really look and hone in, you can really start to see the differences, but also the interconnections that make up the big group. So as we talk today, I wanted to mostly be thinking about the idea of place. Especially a lot of us are local history and heritage organizations. So sometimes like the interpretive area that you are focused on is place-based. Maybe the audiences you're trying to, and if not place-based history, you're certainly thinking about how do I connect with the community locally better and sort of reach new audiences, those subgroupings that make up that place-based community. So I just like to kind of start here and break apart a little bit how we use that word and how we might use it more in this session, um, and then go from there. So how do we know our community? I think there's already a lot of ways that we maybe even intuitively know our community or rely on to know our community. And, one of those ways is thinking about our community's past and present. Those things always shape our idea of community, even if we're not thinking about it so much. For example, our communities might have changed quite a bit, but because of what's happened in the past and how they've been shaped in the past, that maybe led us to our present experience, our present landscape of all the different groups that are represented here. Maybe there was migration, or maybe there was like a natural disaster, or maybe there was some kind of exclusionary law or policy on the books that meant people couldn't come and then people could come. And so that's always shaping our present day experience. But sometimes we have to look to the past to understand how our community came to be the way it is. Lived experience. So we are members of place-based communities. We're working in communities. We have interconnections. We're not just part of one community as individuals, we're part of many communities, but we might also feel we're part of the big community, even if we have those small community experiences. And always there are limits to our lived experience, but it's unique and it's there's depth, and it's something we know really intimately well. So we always know our communities through this lens. We also know through new experiences because although we have limited lived experiences, through our community connections or through our friends or, through our interests and the activities we do, we're always often exposing ourselves to new things and new points of view by virtue of just doing something new and getting out of our our more limited lens now and then. Relationships, I just mentioned sometimes relationships are the avenue to new experiences, but sometimes just being in relationships with people over a long period of time gives you access to someone else's lived experience. And that's something that can broaden your horizons. And it can also help you understand the big community idea, like the place that you're from, or maybe the different groups that you understand as maybe like big and more general. You can understand them in more of their diversity and more of their specificness through relationships. Stories. Stories I love because whether or not you've maybe formed a relationship with somebody, or maybe whether or not you're kind of diving into a new experience, we all kind of interact with stories. We tell stories as history organizations often, and sometimes they're going to find stories to tell other people. And so just by virtue of people being willing to share their story, we often can get insight or a sense of, oh, I never really understood that about the community I live in, or that there was even this other community that I wasn't really aware of at all that seems to have formed around this specific unique experience. And I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't heard their stories. So that's another way. Data is a great way to know our communities better. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but It's a really particular way of knowing our communities, and it's kind of like using a set of tools to really know something in greater detail in a way that maybe will help you grow or change or develop. So it's certainly a great access point to, if you're trying to understand a question, if you're trying to understand an audience, maybe collecting some data is a really great entry point when it feels like their other entry points aren't working so well. And of course, I'll just end with news and reporting because we can't be everywhere at once. So we really rely on local reporting. I know that there's limits to local reporting these days, which is very sad. But it's really great to have outlets for local news and reporting because they're maybe speaking a little bit more closely to our day-to-day experience, maybe covering communities and community efforts and issues in ways that, again, we aren't exposed to based on the limits of our community experiences. And so it's a way to open ourselves up to, oh, I've never thought about it from that lens, or I've never thought about that perspective, or, oh, that's really impacting people. I didn't really know that that was an issue. So I think that those are all things that sometimes we instinctively use to grow our sense of who's in our community and how we know our community. But I also think that we can do this intentionally, looking to all of these different ways of knowing to see, oh, I feel like I do 5 of these or 6 of these, but I really don't learn about my community through data. Like, how can I add that in? How can I add that to complement how I already know my community? So I think that all of these pieces and many more, are things that we rely on, but also maybe should be checking ourselves with if we're feeling like we need to be exposed or we do need to make more connections to build our audiences. And because we're not here in person, I just wanted to invite you, if you have other ideas of things that aren't on this list, feel free to speak up, just shout them out or put them in the chat too. And if I catch any of those other suggestions in the chat, I'll bring them up to the big group, but feel free to come off mute or also ask questions. You can pause for a moment for any questions folks have. Okay, we'll keep watching the chat. Okay, so we just talked about all of these different ways that we can know and do actively know our communities. I wanted to give a few more concrete examples that could be ways to understand your community better if you haven't already pursued them. And I'll just say too that on the side here, this is a photo of where I grew up for most of my school age years. I moved to this area, Richland, Kennewick, Pasco, right near the Columbia Tri-Cities, as people call that area the Tri-Cities, but it's in Benton County. I don't know if we have anyone joining us from over this ways, but I chose this photo because I think it certainly shows a little slice of a place-based community where I grew up and knew it very much as a child, but of course over the years came to know it more as an adult, and my understanding of community there really changed and grew as I grew, and my understanding of history, of data, of community work, and all of the kind of different communities like I was exposed to as an adult, like as all of those things kind of came together. So I really think about an evolving sense of community when I think about the Tri-Cities and I look at this image. I lived on a street that's kind of where like the bendy part of the river at the left, if you're looking at the image, kind of like jets in to the left and jogs back right. That's where my street was growing up. It's where my parents still live, but it's right next to the river, and so you can kind of walk up and look out, and there's a lot of parks and everything there. So, um, yeah, so I think just to kind of go back into all these kind of like more concrete ways of knowing your community that I have to the left. Visit and talk to staff at your local tribal museum. Um, I suggest going to the Governor's Office of Indian Affairs, Goya's website if you haven't checked that out already, or if you're not familiar with your closest tribal museum. There's a great uh, there's a there's a great directory there. You can also find a tribal directory there. So, potentially if there isn't a tribal museum in your area, maybe you'd like to reach out to the like heritage or preservation officers, especially if you're a heritage or history organization. That's a really great way to learn and maybe have a base to visit and learn from a local tribal museum or learn from a local preservation office about both the past and the present of the place that you live and the different types of relationships and experiences that uh, communities will have of your area. And then I also include past and present census data. Of course, data is limited sometimes because, of course, to collect data, we kind of break people up into categories, and sometimes those categories don't do the best job of really narrating or telling the story of our lived experience. People can sometimes feel like those categories are really reductive, even. But I do think that they can be an entry point to having conversation about what parts of your community you know really well, and maybe things that show up in the data about your community that you don't really think about or talk about a lot that probably impact maybe how people engage with you, or maybe it's the language that people speak, or maybe it's a little bit more of family or income level. It just can give you a bit of an introduction to maybe pursuing and finding out more about what your community is like. And then of course it's the tip of the iceberg. Always the data is, you know it's a good starting point, but usually the way you're using data is to like ask deeper questions. It's like, oh, now we know the next question to ask, and then we know kind of what direction to go next. It's kind of a helping you set a direction and answer some questions, but the questioning itself, that's never done. So third, get to know your neighborhood community service organizations, local schools, other community hubs, and this will give you more access to finding out how to meet communities where they're at. It could even be down the line, especially if you're building relationships, a way to find volunteers and board members because you're actually having a chance to connect with people, and maybe finding some common ground or some shared goals, or maybe a way to support the goals that already exist in your community, then maybe you actually have a lot more to offer than you thought when you initially, maybe got to know an organization or got to know a community after, like, oh, we actually have something to offer. We have a space, we have some resources to come table at events, things like that. I see a message in the chat from Dolly who said that this is a very useful tool for us, not sure if it exists for other counties. And it looks like you sent a link to Grant County Trends. And Dolly, I'm wondering if this is kind of like a summary, like over time, specifically for your county. Is it like based on census data, or is it county specific data?
Sorry, it took me a minute to unmute
That's okay.
and undo my thing. So yeah, it's a blog, and it's
Nice.
just all kinds of data. You can search data about people, agriculture, economic vitality, education, and it comes out of Eastern Washington University,
Oh,
and
great.
and the Grant County Economic Development Council. And I use it all the time. It compares us
Mm,
to the state and the nation. So it's really good, like when I'm writing grants and it's like, hey, our median income is X
yes,
number of percentage below the median income for the state or whatever. So yeah.
absolutely. That sounds so useful. And maybe other people have something like that that their county puts together. So sounds like something good to check on if you haven't checked already, just in
Oh
case
yeah.
they do
I
it.
I use it all the time. It's really wonderful. And it slices and dices the data lots of different ways for you. So,
That's great. Yeah. Does anyone else on the call have something similar that they found really useful as a tool that another organization puts together and sort of collects? Checking for hands. Yeah. Yeah, that's excellent. If you don't have something like that, I would encourage you to kind of play around with some of the census data tools because you could just customize like kind of like a mini report, which, for example, would have things like income, languages spoken in the home, um, like you know, other things. I'm trying to think what other things. Of course, you can kind of look at um, race and gender and things like that. But it's nice because you can look at the county level and it's even nice to compare. I would say if you have kind of an idea of your service area, but you think, oh, this is kind of what we naturally think is the boundaries of our community, but we're pretty close to this county, or we might see a lot of people come into our county for like this time of the year. We do a festival, we have a big like summer crowd that comes through. Maybe exploring a little bit what those surrounding areas are like and comparing them could be helpful, and the census could help you do. For example, in this image on the right, um, on the left side is Benton County, on the right side is Franklin County, and the only thing that separates them is the river. And living on the left side, like on the Benton County side, I could see across the water to Franklin County and like the houses there, and I never really thought like, oh, that's like a entirely different county because I don't know. It's funny to have the river kind of be this like separator. It can also be a connector. Obviously, there's tons of boating and there's docks on either side, and of course, there's not a direct road until you go to some of the bridges that are south. But I think we sometimes have these like arbitrary boundaries that we sort of think about to define our service areas or maybe where we get our data from. So if we can play around with those boundaries and pull in maybe a couple more of those like place-based areas that we don't usually think about as being connected with us, we might get some really helpful new understanding about audiences we don't think about as much just because of some of these more um, arbitrary types of divisions. All right. So I think we want to move into our breakout time. And so I'm going to jump us to our discussion and set us up before we split off. I think probably only, I don't know, like maybe two groups is fine. Um, but I do think it's nice to talk to just 2 to 3 people about this because you have a little bit more of an exchange. Um, but I wanted to set up that we could choose one of the 3 ways that we just looked at on the previous slide and uh, talk about that one particular tool or way of knowing your community with your group. I mean, if you want to talk about two, you might have time to talk about 2 or 3, but just focus in and see which one's really resonating with your group in particular, and speak to each other a little bit more about how you would use it. For example, maybe there's a way to share or exchange some of the challenges that you might have in knowing your community with this particular tool or approach, but maybe there's some opportunities too. And then any goals you might have if you actually led your staff or your board in an exercise of using that particular tool to find out maybe what more you could know using it, and maybe what some of those goals would be. So just to remind you, these were a few that we talked about. Maybe there's a related tool or a related kind of experience that you want to hone in on based on who's in your group, in case anyone wants to write those three down. So we'll just take 7 minutes, and then we're going to come back to the group. And if you could just designate one person who's going to do a mini share out just to see, what did you talk about? You know, what were you thinking about using? Maybe there's a new tool or a new resource, kind of like Dolly was sharing, that you could introduce the group to. That would be great. So we're going to go ahead, do the breakouts, and see you back here in 7 minutes. Hi, everybody. Okay, I think we got most folks back. Well, it was really helpful to hear what everyone was thinking about, just even in the one breakout room that I was in. And I would love it if someone from each of the breakout rooms wouldn't mind speaking up and just saying a couple headlines about things that came up in the conversation. So I might ask that someone in our breakout room start us off, and then we'll popcorn.
I'll go ahead and go. So we were talking about census data and how that might not, if people don't do the census, you're going to, skip some information there. I know we were only supposed to talk about one, but then we started talking about, going to where the community gathers and how, again, trying to reach all the facets of your community. Like I mentioned, I can't imagine trying to do this in Seattle. But we talked about like how our museum goes to farmers markets. We're going to try to do the Grant County Fair, just trying to meet as many people as you can, because we've seen to reach more people through outreach than trying to get them sometimes to our museum. We're getting, lower and lower numbers for some of our types of programming, like lectures. We don't know if that's what we're offering or just how people want to interact with us. So there's the goods and bads, pros and cons to all of it, trying to reach more people.
Yeah, thanks, Anne. One thing I thought was interesting to your point was how you were talking about the idea of programs or events as a way of knowing your community, and that you were seeing that not as great of a way of knowing your community at this point, and that because you're not seeing as many people come through the doors that way, they were starting to pivot to thinking, well, I think we need to know what will draw people in, or to do the outreach to meet people where they're at, to go to farmers markets, to show up, do something that's more outreach related. And I think that's where a lot of organizations are often find themselves, frankly, is that their strategy or their main strategy of knowing their community is through the programming, where people are coming to you. It's the model of people coming to you, you're drawing people in. Well, sometimes that breaks down because there's there's something that's not connecting, right? And so thinking outside of those usual strands of knowing kind of gives you new options, new tools. So I really liked that conversation. Someone else want to jump in from their group, share what they were talking about?
We had a great conversation. I don't know if Morella or Jessica, Dolly probably was the extrovert and would have offered to share out, but she has left the call. She had a really great, she talked about just paying attention to the types of restaurants that are in your community as a way of kind of getting a better sense of demographics, which in Moses Lake, they've got apparently a lot of great tacos and good Japanese and Korean food. And then Morella from Kenmore shared about the ways that they collaborate with the city and with other nonprofits in town. Specifically, it sounds like a really great partnership with the Senior Center, which I thought was a really good example of kind of that. Not always obvious, we're so used to partnering with other museums or other arts and culture orgs, but like sort of extending beyond that to work with other nonprofits. And then Christian from the Museum of Flight has joined us and talked about they work a lot with the neighborhood Department of Neighborhoods with the city of Seattle that I think kind of collects a lot of data and then sort of serves as a connector for organizations. And then we talked a lot with Jessica about the uniqueness of Point Roberts, Washington as an exclave of about 900 permanent residents that balloons to over 5,000 in the summer, and kind of navigating the current politics with the relationship between the US and Canada right now. And that's certainly impacting their kind of their audience a little bit. But it sounds like they do some great work communicating out what's happening. So I don't know, that was just my little, I shouldn't have summarized. I was not really a participant, but maybe Morella or Jessica or Christian would like to add something.
No, I think you did an excellent job, Allison. Yeah, I mean, I think we talked again about, I think for the smaller groups like ours, just the fact that we really kind of need to be boots on the ground in the neighborhood. Even I mentioned going to the city council meeting last night, kind of hearing what's going on, and that's kind of for us has been the most successful way, I think, for us to really be dialed in on what makes sense to work on. Yeah.
I love that idea. That makes so much sense. Like, show up to your council meetings and really try to get, the pulse of what's going on, and a lot more people coming there perhaps to share and to amplify their issues too. So you're in the room for that. Sounds helpful.
I'd like to add on what Marilla just said. I'm from Kenmore as well. But we're also looking at, assisting the city with the parks and recreation plan, which, that's really a community, that is a tremendous opportunity for the community to intermingle. And so, I think there's real opportunities there for us to provide not only the history of the city and how it interacts with the parks, but going forward, what are the community needs?
And I'll just add, our previous museum administration, we didn't do much outreach because we were really concerned about people coming to the museum. It didn't mean anything to us unless they were in our doors. What was the point? But it just isn't working. So we've had to do a lot more outreach. And when we got Dolly, that's been her focus. And it really has helped you go to where the people are versus waiting for them to come find you. So that's what we've done. And people who've lived here their whole lives, they go, oh, I've never been in, because, we're not always local tourists. So it's really helped. It's helped our numbers.
I love that. I love hearing that. I love that you're really, really connecting, and it's been really helping. All that work, all that effort.
And I'll share with the group a couple of things that we've done here so far. So we've hosted a couple of community listening sessions, and when we say community, it could be 100 types of communities, right? But we looked at our neighborhoods that are around here, near the Museum of Flight, and you have, you got Burien, you have Renton, Beacon Hill, and so forth. So we set up some community listening sessions. We honestly took a lot of time. First of all, like gaining the trust of the folks that we wanted to have here at the museum, because they often, as a member of the BIPOC community, you get all these questions and you just get sucked, all the information, and then you never hear back from the folks, right, that you share your information with. So they've been, it's very tricky, but we gained the trust. We had about 21 folks that came to the museum, and we had a listening session where they just kind of, we have some preempt questions, but they just shared their thoughts how the community could be a better place for them, right? first of all, you have representation matters. What you thought your exhibit, social media, experiences, public programming. They want to see themselves represented here at the museum. The increasing awareness. We do great things for them, but they don't know about it. So you might have to look at how can we get this more accessible. Maybe you have to translate documents so everyone knows what, it's easy for them to understand what kind of financial assistance you have for them and so forward. You folks mentioned this before, the presence in the community. So we always ask for folks to come to the museum, but they have transportation challenges, right? It's for them is we have South Park just about a couple of miles away from us. There's no public transportation that gets you here to the museum in easy access, right? It just you got to take like 3 buses to get here. So yeah, transportation was a big one, and obviously just kind of participation in culturally responsive programming. So again, just having members of the community come to the museum, share their experiences, and offering the museum or one of our spaces that we have for meetings as a third space. That's one of the challenges that we've heard from them. Like they want to connect with other members of the community. They want to have a place where they can gather, share their experiences and so forth, but they don't have that. They could go to the library or they can pay, but financially it's a barrier. So they want the museum to offer a space for them to come to the museum and just kind of gather. So it's been fun, honestly, just been part of this, and it's a long journey for sure. It's just the beginning, and I don't see a deadline or a finish line, but it's been fun.
You covered a lot right there, Christian. I really appreciate that, and hearing about everything you're doing. That's really good for all of us to keep in mind, just to think about each of us. What are these ways we've tried, and just also seeing successful work and ongoing work that's happening. Dylan just dropped a great study in the chat too. I hope people take a look. Just he noted that people are staying home more often after the pandemic. So there's some big cultural and climate shifts that, I mean, we're still understanding and grappling with, like lasting impacts of the pandemic on audiences and movement and connecting in our community. So I think trading knowledge about those patterns and trends is also really helpful, because it might help us answer questions about what we're seeing and in our unique places, but that might be impacting people across the state, across our communities. Good to note. Well, we are at, I just want to note, we start a little late, but we're also at our time. But I do want to give folks, anyone else who just wanted to add a couple things or a point that came up in their discussion that they'd like to share it with the group before we close. Does anyone else want to add something about the work that they're doing?
The only thing I would add is when you do your outreach, we bought a big sign that pulls up and puts next to our table, because you can do all the outreach you want, but if people don't know who you are, it gets lost. So a lot of signage at your booth, who you are, who you are, who you are.
I love that. I love like just like something like with your name, like really, really big, because, even if you're just passing through an event and you're not like, I don't have like an immediate need to go over and like talk to folks in your local community, it might be really meaningful to know that your local community showed up at your event, and that just is like the goodwill and the trust that can just come from like seeing you again and again in different spaces, that shows care, shows value in ways that they might not have associated with your organization in the past. So the next time they want to go to an exhibit, or they have friends in town, or the next time that they're thinking about doing a museum or history or something like that thing, they're like, oh yeah, the notoriety and the reputation has built up just by the name really big and being there with people. So I think that's a really great and hopefully not too far afield thing for all of us who maybe aren't doing it yet, but something achievable. Well, we have come to the close of our session time together, but we did record this. So if you missed the intro part or anything like that, we did not record the breakout rooms, but we did record this end of our kind of like our debrief together. So hopefully that's a good reminder or resource. But thanks everyone for joining. I know this is an ongoing open conversation, certainly something that helps us with our imagining what we can do for the 250th, but kind of in general, just knowing and building trust with our communities, like is all the time work. So thanks for everything you're doing. Reach out to me at any time you want to talk more about these things, or Allison or Dylan. And thanks for making it a great conversation.
Yeah, and don't forget, next week, 10 o'clock, I will send out a reminder, not 11, is the last in our kind of month-long series, which I think will really connect the dots between all the conversations we've had with Alethea and the Out of Mini One project. And Dylan's gonna like really get into some nuts and bolts about doing collecting data, feedback, and evaluation with communities. So next week at 10, we will record them and get these up on our YouTube channel and everything. And I'm going to send an email later today with all the links that Alethea shared and her slide deck and everything. So thanks for being flexible. Apologies again for the hiccup with the timing, but hopefully we'll see you next week at 10 o'clock. Bye, everyone.
Take care.